Brad Holmes is quietly having a stellar offseason for the Detroit Lions. And even though it doesn't involve big names, even though it doesn't involve crazy contracts, Brad Holmes is doing the exact right thing to keep this Lions team intact for years to come. And today, we're going to take a look at exactly why his conservative approach to the free agency market is exactly what Detroit needed. Now, starting off with the free agents that Brad Holmes has signed, I think he's done a pretty good job. There haven't been a ton of big names. There haven't even been a ton of signings, but the players that have been brought on have been really good options and have been really smart signings. Of course, Brad Holmes started the free agency with DJ Reed, who got a 3-year, $42 million contract. And I think that kicked off the expectation for a lot of people. It brought a lot of people to believe that Brad Holmes was going to be a big spender, that he was going to go out and sign all these big name players and really make this Detroit Lions team fantastic at everything. But he hasn't, right? It was a great signing. It was replacing Carlton Davis for a little bit cheaper than what Davis got for New England. And I think it sets a lot of people up expectation-wise for things that were never really going to happen. He then the next day signed Roy Lopez from the Arizona Cardinals to a 1-year, $4.65 million contract, signed Grant Stewart to a 1-year deal, and of course this season has also re-signed players like Derek Barnes to a 3-year, $25 million contract, Levi Onwuzurike signed yesterday to a 1-year, $5 million deal, and of course Marcus Davenport to a 1-year, $1.75. Other guys like Dan Skipper, Ezekiel Turner, Anthony Pittman have joined the crew as well. And even this morning, right, they re-signed a couple of guys like Trevor Nowaske and some offensive linemen that have just rejoined the team and kept the core intact. But a lot of people are really upset. And a lot of people are really worried that this Detroit Lions team is going to regress in 2025. And unfortunately, it's just going to happen. They won 15 games a season ago. They go in with one of the hardest schedules of the 2025 season. Record-wise, they're going to regress. They're probably going to win 12, 13 games next year, which by definition is a step backwards. But I don't think they're going to be any less competitive due to the moves that they have made because they've essentially replaced every single player they've lost this year with somebody younger, cheaper, and just as good, if not better. Now let's start off with DJ Reed, the big free agent, right? Because he's replacing arguably the most important part of this defense that they lost was Carlton Davis. So taking a look at Reed versus Davis, they're really similar, right? Davis last year played 13 games, had 56 tackles, 11 passes defended, 2 interceptions, a 55.3% completion rate allowed, allowing 567 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. That's a good cornerback season. That's a great season for what the Detroit Lions had as a secondary last season, especially compared to where they were a few years ago. But you look at Reed, he played one more game with 14. He had 64 tackles, which is quite a bit more. He had the same amount of passes defended. And even though he didn't get an interception last year and his completion rate was a little bit worse by just a few percentiles, he allowed nearly 160 less yards and the same amount of touchdowns. They got DJ Reed for about $4 million cheaper per year and gave him significantly less guaranteed money. It was a good deal. It essentially is a one-to-one replacement. You get a little bit more completions against, but significantly fewer yards, the same amount of touchdowns. And, obviously interceptions are kind of a fluky stat, right? They're a little bit like sacks for an edge rusher where it's not really what's most important, right? Play to play, you're not getting an interception, just like every play, you're not going to get a sack. It's more about pressures. It's more about completion rate. It's more about yards allowed. It's more about targets. And those are the things where DJ Reed really excels and even has a slight edge over Carlton Davis in this particular spot. So one-to-one comparison, I think this is a wash, if not a slight upgrade for the Detroit Lions in the secondary. Roy Lopez is a player that I think is flying really far under the radar. A 4-year player who in his 4-year career has 137 tackles, 17 TFLs, 3 sacks, a forced fumble, 2 fumble recoveries, and 4 passes defended. The 28-year-old nose tackle is a violent run defender, has a great motor, is a good locker room guy, and is your Kyle Pico replacement, a player that played for the first month of the season, was really good for the Detroit Lions, and unfortunately got injured, right? Unfortunately didn't end up staying for the entire season and wasn't able to take the field for the entire year in Detroit, but he was good for what he had. He was great for the Detroit Lions for a month and about 5 weeks of the season in 2024. And I think that's exactly what Roy Lopez can do. Him combined with Makai Wingo, combined with Levi Onwuzurike should be a serviceable enough job to replace the production that Aleem McNeil would give you over the first month or two of the season. Aleem won't start the year, probably won't play until mid-October, but until then, I think Roy Lopez is going to be a great run defender in the middle. He's going to rotate with Makai Wingo on pass rushing downs and Levi Onwuzurike at times, and those three are going to replicate the success of Aleem McNeil. None of the three are quite as good as Aleem. None of the three will do everything that Aleem can do. But in a combined effort, Roy Lopez for 1 year, $4.7 million essentially makes a lot of sense for Detroit. And it's not a splashy signing. It's not a superstar. It's not an all pro, but it is good, valuable depth. And after last season, where the Lions lost so many talented players, especially on the defensive line, I'm not sure how you could look at this deal for a young, healthy player that averages 17 games a season and has been productive for almost half a decade and be upset with the 1 year move for Detroit. Grant Stewart is kind of the same way, a player that last year played 17 games for the Colts, started 5. His best game came in his first start against Miami, where he had 19 tackles and a tackle for loss. His entire season consisted of 40 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and just overall was a good player for the Colts. He's a special teams ace. He's a leader. He has a high motor. He's productive at linebacker. Who does that remind you of? It's Jalen Reeves-Maybin. This is the Jalen Reeves-Maybin replacement in Grant Stewart, a player that is going to be potentially a special teams captain, a great locker room presence, just a good overall presence for the entire team. And if you need him to play linebacker, he can play linebacker. You probably don't want him to. You probably aren't going to put him in that situation if you don't have to. But at the end of the day, in the bleakest of situations, he can play linebacker and has proven he can do so at a pretty high level if it is all said and done. So they've replaced Jalen Reeves-Maybin, their special teams captain. They've replaced Carlton Davis, their best cornerback. They've replaced Kyle Pico, a good depth option at defensive tackle. And the job isn't done, right? There are other players to get. The Detroit Lions do have needs at different positions. And I do think that there are needs that need to be filled, right? Backup guard, wide receiver 3, edge rusher 2, safety 3, cornerbacks 5 and 6, a defensive tackle for next season or for 2 seasons from now when DJ Reader is gone, right? A tight end 2 potentially to upgrade behind Sam Laporta. But those are all backup options. Those are all options that can be grabbed in free agency still, because it is only the third day of the offseason. And there are a lot of good players, right? Cooper Kupp, Tim Patrick, Josh Reynolds at wide receiver, Brandon Scherf, Will Hernandez, Makai Wingo, or Makai Becton, excuse me, at the guard position, Matt Judon, Dante Fowler, Calais Campbell at the edge rusher position, Jeff Okudah, Isaiah Oliver, Asante Samuel Jr. at cornerback, Marcus Williams, Von Bell, Julian Blackman at safety, and so many other good quality players. The offseason isn't over. Week 1 isn't tomorrow. The Detroit Lions don't take the field for another 5 months. And until then, they have free agency, in which Brad Holmes has proven that in the latter half, even going into the second week of free agency, he's not afraid to make moves and he's not afraid to make signings. They have a draft at the end of April with 7 selections to potentially fill out this roster even further and add starting caliber talent that they don't even need anymore. This Detroit Lions roster is star-studded. They have a top 10 quarterback, a top 1 running back duo, a top 5 wide receiver, probably a top 30 wide receiver in Jameson Williams, a top 7 tight end in Sam Laporta, a top 3 offensive line with the line that they have put together. They have a top 5 edge rusher. They have a top 5 defensive tackle duo. They have a great deep linebacking core. They have a good, strong, young secondary with 2 Pro Bowl / all-pro caliber safeties. They have a Pro Bowl punter and kicker, for that matter. Their special teams is fantastic. They have an all-pro kick and punt returner in Khalif Raymond. They are one of the deepest and most talented rosters in football, and all they're missing right now is a little bit more depth. They're missing that wide receiver 3. They're missing that backup guard. They're missing the edge rusher 2. They're missing cornerbacks 5 and 6. They're missing their third safety. Those are all positions that can be filled out in free agency. And they're going to be players that everybody's upset about, right? Regardless of who they sign as a backup corner, people are going to be upset. Regardless of who they sign at safety, everyone's going to be upset. Regardless of who they sign at edge rusher, people are going to be upset. But at the end of the day, this team doesn't need more starters. This team doesn't need more superstars. They don't need more mouths to feed. They don't need more massive contracts to give out. What they need is depth. What they need is role players. What they need is guys to fill in if injuries arise yet again. And that is why what Brad Holmes is doing is incredibly smart. It's why waiting for these free agents to become on cheaper deals. It's why waiting for the bargain, waiting for the backups, waiting for the depth players is the right move for the Detroit Lions. Now, you may agree and you may disagree. You may think this Detroit Lions team needs more all-pros to be successful, and you may think that this team is ready to win a Super Bowl today if it were to be played. But at the end of the day, Brad Holmes is a back-to-back two-time executive of the year. He has brought the Detroit Lions from the laughingstock of the NFL to a true Super Bowl contender and a number one seeded franchise. If anybody knows how to put this team over the top, if anybody knows how to put this team together, it is Brad Holmes. And I think everybody just needs to relax, to trust him, and really to take a look at what the Lions need and know that Brad Holmes is addressing those needs each and every day. So with that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Let me know down in the comments below your opinions on the roster and your opinions overall on the strategy for free agency. I'm curious to hear what you guys think, but with all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.